We're going to be reviewing factoring today. So let's just remember how to multiply polynomials. And remember, every term has to be multiplied by every term. So every term in the first binomial or polynomial has to get multiplied by everything in the second polynomial. So we're first going to take this x and we're going to multiply it by every term in the second. So x times 2x is 2x squared. X times the negative 3 is negative 3x. Then now we're going to take the second term, the 5, and we're going to multiply it by every term in the second. So 5 times 2x is 10x, and 5 times the negative 3 is negative 15. And so remember that you always can usually combine some like terms that are in the middle. So we're going to combine those. So we still have our 2x squared. We have a minus 3x and a positive 10x. So if you add those together, you're going to get a positive 7x minus 15. That would be those two polynomials multiplied together. So over here on number 2, we have 2x minus 5 squared. Remember, common mistake there is just to square each term inside there. But remember, that's in parentheses, and that means you're going to write that polynomial twice and then multiply it out. So 2x times 2x gives us 4x squared. 2x times the negative 5 is negative 10x. So now in the second term, negative 5 times the 2x is another negative 10x. And negative 5 times negative 5 is positive 25. Again, we're going to combine those like terms. We have a negative 10x and a negative 10x. So that makes negative 20x plus 25. There's your final answer. Okay, so now we have a trinomial, which means this has 3 terms, times a binomial, so that's 2 terms. So again, every term in the first binomial or polynomial has to be multiplied by every term in the second. So first off, we're going to take our x squared and go multiply it by everything. So x squared times x gives us x cubed. X squared times the positive 3 is plus 3x squared. Okay, so next we've got to take the 2x, or negative 2x. We're going to multiply that by x. That gives us negative 2x squared. And then negative 2 times 3, negative 6x. Our last term here is this 1. We've got to multiply it by everything. So 1 times x is plus x, and then plus 3. 1 times 3. Okay, so again, you're going to have these like terms that you're going to join together. Look, we've got some x squareds there, and then we also have got some x terms that we can join together. So we have x cubed. So positive 3x squared, negative 2x squared leaves us just with 1x squared. The negative 6x plus x leaves us with negative 5x, and then plus the 3. All right, so now we're going to factor some polynomials. And just as a quick base, whenever we are factoring, we need to always first look for the greatest common factor. Is there something we can take out of all the terms in that polynomial just to make that polynomial smaller? All right, so then after that, it all depends on the number of terms. All right, so if there are 2 terms, you're going to think of, is it the difference of 2 squares? Or could they be the sum or difference of cubes? Okay, so if it's 2 terms, that's what we think of. If it's 3 terms, we're going to just use the big X method. And we will probably, let's just go ahead and do that. So that's A times C, B is on the bottom, divide by A. All right, and we'll go over that in a minute when we come to 1. So then if it's 4 terms, you're always going to think of grouping. So just depending on those number of terms, first and foremost, always take out a GCF, then look at your number of terms. It's 2 terms, is it the difference of squares or the sum or difference of cubes? 3 terms, we're going to factor using the big X method, or 4 terms, we're going to use grouping. Okay, so here we go. Factor each polynomial completely. So we've got x squared minus 6x plus 8. Well, remember, if there's nothing in front of this x squared, we can just think what times what is the c term that adds up to be that b term. Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and show you the big X method. So remember, at the top, we always put a times c, so that's 1 times 8, which is just 8. The b term goes in the bottom part, and that's negative 6. And then we're dividing by the a term, which is just 1. So we're going to think, what times what is 8 times at the top, and then adds to be negative 6. Well, that's going to be negative 4 and negative 2. And then when we use the big X method, remember what's on the bottom moves to the front, so that factor is x minus 4. This factor is just going to be x minus 2 because that 1. All right, so our factors are x minus 4, x minus 2. And that is that polynomial factored. And so we could have just done it like this too. It's when the big X method really comes in handy, when you've got something in front of that x squared. Okay, so number 5, we have 27x squared minus 48. Well, that is 2 terms, but my first step is always look for that greatest common factor. Well, they both contain a 3. So let's factor out a 3, and then let's see what we have left. Well, if we divide each of those terms by 3, we're left with 9x squared minus 16. Okay, well, I still have 2 terms here, so I'm going to still look at this and say, can I factor this thing some more? Well, 9's a perfect square, and 16 is a perfect square, and it's got a minus in the middle, so that is the difference of 2 squares. And remember, when we do that, we leave that 3 on the outside, so that is 3x plus 4 and 3x minus 4. So the square root of 9 is 3, the square root of 16 is 4, and 1 needs to be a plus, 1 needs to be a minus when we factor those. So that takes away that middle term, and that is your final answer. Okay, so number 6 here, we have negative 15x squared minus 5x. And anytime we have a leading coefficient that's a negative and we see that we have a GCF, we are going to take out that negative GCF. So I'm going to take out a negative 5, and then both terms have an x, so we're going to take out that x also. So if we take a negative 5x, we are left with 3x plus 1. Okay, this 3x plus 1 cannot factor anymore, so that is your final answer. And remember, it's always just like you're dividing by that negative 5x on both of those terms. And so that's where we get that 1. Okay, so now we have 4x squared plus 12x plus 9. Okay, so this is a really good example of when to use our big X method. So remember, top box is a times c. And when we're talking about that, remember that's ax squared plus bx plus c is the standard form, and so that's why we're calling that a times c. So 4 times 9 is 36. The b term is 12. And then we divide by the a term, which is 4. So what times what is 36 that adds up to be 12? Well, that's going to be 6 and 6. Well, these both reduce to 3 over 2. And remember, bottom number always moves to the front. So making that factor 2x plus 3. This factor is also 2x plus 3. So the final answer is 2x plus 3 times 2x plus 3. And when you have the same thing, we just like to write it as a square. Okay, let's look at a few more. Run through these. So again, we're going to use the big X method here. 2 times negative 9 is negative 18. B term is negative 3. Dividing both sides by 2. What times what's negative 18? That adds up to be a negative 3. Well, that's going to be negative 6 and positive 3. This will reduce to negative 3. And the other one doesn't reduce, so the first factor is x minus 3. That's this one, x minus 3. The 2 moves to the front, leaving that plus 3. So 2x plus 3 is the other factor. Okay, we'll look at number 9. We have got 4 terms here, so we're going to do grouping. So remember, when we do grouping, we look at the first 2 terms and we say, what's the GCF of these two? And the GCF here would be x squared. Then what's the GCF of these last 2 terms? And that GCF would be 2. So let's take an x squared out of the first 2 terms, and that leaves us with x minus 4. Then let's take that 2 out of the last 2 terms, and that leaves us with x minus 4. Well, notice we still have this x minus 4 in common. And because it still has this plus sign, because we did a GCF out of each term, it is not in factored form yet until everything is in multiplication form. So then we take what's on the outside of the parentheses, the x squared plus 2, and then the x minus 4. Now it's in factored form, because remember, when you go multiply, you're taking the first term and you're multiplying it by everything in that second binomial. Then you take the 2 and you multiply it by that second binomial. So that's exactly what we've just done. Okay, number 10. It looks like it has a GCF of just an x. Every term has an x in it. So we're going to take that x out, and we're left with 8x squared minus 10x minus 3. Okay, so we're going to try to factor this one some more, and we're going to use the big X method on that. 8 times 3 is negative 24. B term is negative 10. Divide by that A term, which is 8. So what times what is negative 24? That adds up to be a negative 10. Well, that should be negative 12 and a positive 2. Well, both of these terms will reduce. So they're both divisible by 4, so that's negative 3 over 2. This one reduces to 1/4. Okay, so on the negative 3 over 2, remember that 2 moves to the front, so 2x minus 3 is that factor. And then the 4 here moves to the front, and that's 4x plus 1 is that factor. And there you go. Okay, so x cubed minus 8. Okay, so remember we said either, if it's 2 terms, it's either the difference of 2 squares or it's the sum or difference of 2 cubes. Well, I don't have an x in the second term to take out, so that is cubes. So let's just review those. So the sum of 2 cubes means you're going to have something that is like a cubed plus b cubed. Okay, that is always going to factor into a plus b, a squared, minus ab plus b squared. If it is the difference of 2 cubes, a cubed minus b cubed, it always factors into a minus b, a squared, plus AB plus B squared. Okay, how can you remember that? Maybe someone has taught you the acronym SOAP. So just know if you've got your cubes, this is always the same sign. So notice this is a plus if this is a plus. This one's a minus, this one's a minus. Then it's the opposite sign. So if this one's a plus, now this one's a minus. This one's a minus, so now this one is a plus. I'm going to remove those because then the last one is always positive. So we call that the SOAP. That's how we remember it. Well, if the one we're looking at here is x cubed minus 2 cubed. So 2 cubed is 8. So in that instance, like A is your x and B is your 2. So we know this is automatically going to factor into x minus 2, just following the rule, x squared plus the 2 multiplied, A times B, so that's 2x, always positive. 2 squared is 4. And so that is that cube factored. Okay, the last one we have here is x to the 4th minus 81. Well, it is 2 terms, and so we notice that they're both perfect squares. So that's the difference of 2 squares. So we're going to have x squared plus 9 and x squared minus 9. Well, just notice here that we still have x squared minus 9. Well, that can be factored some more because it's still the difference of 2 squares. So we're going to write our x squared plus 9. And then our x squared plus minus 9 factors into x plus 3 and x minus 3. So make sure you always factor those completely. Watch always and see if you can factor it some more.